day, under the blazing daylight of a live congressional showdown, Jasmine Crockett unleashes a firestorm. Farm bankruptcies surging 55%, children surviving on just $6 a day, and America facing its first measles outbreak in 20 years. The chamber explodes, Republicans screaming, Trump frozen for 47 seconds, and leaked emails revealing how the Trump-Kennedy regime gutted vaccine defenses and slashed the largest health budget in U.S. history. Mothers hold photos of lost children. Farmers cry out from the galleries, and millions watch in disbelief as Crockett pounds the table, her words shaking the nation like an earthquake. In a country where hunger rises, diseases return, and leaders lie, will one woman's voice in daylight spark the movement that saves America's future? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The chamber shook like a battlefield, not a hearing room. Shouts ricocheted off the marble walls, gavel slams were drowned out by angry voices, and cameras zoomed in on the woman at the center of the storm. Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't waiting for permission, she wasn't waiting for order, she exploded. Her words cut through the chaos like a blade. Trump is starving America's children while pretending to make it healthy again. The silence that followed lasted only half a heartbeat before the room detonated again. Gasps, yells, shock. America's millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens, caught between disbelief and fury. Crockett didn't flinch. She raised a stack of papers high in her hand, shaking them so hard the microphones caught the thud of each page. Farm bankruptcies up 55% this year. Families losing land passed down for generations. SNAP benefits cut to nothing. Children scraping by on $6 a day for food. $6. What would you do if your child had only $6 a day to eat? Her voice cracked like a whip, and for a moment the audience watching at home felt the sting themselves. In classrooms across America, kids fainting from hunger. In farmhouses, doors padlocked shut, dreams collapsing with each foreclosure. It wasn't numbers, it was lives unraveling in real time. Across the table, Republicans shifted in their seats. Trump sat back, arms folded, a smug grin plastered across his face, the picture of arrogance. He leaned toward the mic, his voice dripping with contempt. Another Democrat's scare tactic. America is strong. Farmers love me. Kids love me. Don't believe her lies. The words slithered out, smooth and rehearsed, but the camera caught it, the twitch in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped nervously on the table. Crockett's accusation had landed, and the mask was cracking. She pounced. Strong. Farmers are bankrupt, kids are starving. Diseases we killed decades ago are crawling back into our schools. That's not strength, Mr. President, that's collapse. The room erupted again. Green shouted from behind him. Jordan banged his fist on the desk. Cruz yelled something incoherent about socialism. But Crockett didn't break eye contact with Trump. It was predator against predator, her stare refusing to yield, her tone climbing with each word. You built your empire on lies, Mr. President. Now you're building your legacy on hunger. Gasps rippled across the chamber. The chairman slammed the gavel, demanding order, but order was long gone. The hearing was no longer a hearing, it was a war, and every American watching knew it. The air buzzed with the feeling that something irreversible had just begun, something bigger than politics, something raw and dangerous. Crockett leaned closer to the mic, her voice low now, almost a whisper, but it carried like thunder. This is the truth you can't silence, and this is the truth America will remember. Trump slammed his palms on the desk, his voice booming like a cannon blast through the chamber. You're a liar, a socialist, a disgrace to this country. The words rolled out sharp and venomous, spittle flying as he leaned forward, jabbing his finger toward Crockett like a weapon. His face twisted, veins throbbing in his neck, the mask of composure shattered. This wasn't the confident showman, this was raw fury, live on national television. The roar ignited his allies instantly. Marjorie Taylor Greene shot out of her seat, her voice shrill and cutting through the chaos. Crockett is nothing but a fraud who hates America. Jim Jordan, sleeves already rolled, slammed his fist on the desk, barking, You should resign. In shame. You're embarrassing this institution. Ted Cruz leaned back with a smirk, adding, This is the circus Democrats bring clowns lecturing the president. The chamber convulsed into chaos, voices overlapping, insults colliding, in a deafening storm. But Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned forward, eyes blazing, letting the insults ricochet around her until she chose her moment. Then, like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath, her voice cut across the nose low, cold, deadly precise. You call yourselves patriots. You're not patriots, you're parasites. Parasites feeding off children's hunger and farmers' despair. The words hung heavy in the air, heavier than any insult hurled her way. The room faltered. Even the shouting seemed to choke in midair as the weight of her strike landed. Trump blinked, stunned for a fraction of a second, his mouth opening but no sound emerging. Green's voice cracked as she tried to shout over it, but it rang hollow now, the chamber's energy shifting like a tide pulling away from the shoreline. Crockett pressed on, her tone rising like fire building in a furnace. You wave your flags, you chant your slogans, but when America's children cry out from hunger, you look away. When families collapse under bankruptcy, you shrug. When disease spreads, you laugh. That's not leadership, that's betrayal. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was shock. The kind of silence that makes millions watching at home hold their breath, waiting for what comes next. Cameras zoomed tight on Trump's face, his jaw tightening, eyes darting, the cracks widening for the nation to see. The GOP allies fidgeted in their seats, suddenly less certain, their bluster momentarily swallowed by the force of her words. Crockett leaned closer to the mic, her voice steady now, rich with conviction. The con, after a storm that leaves devastation in its wake. You can scream at me, you can insult me, you can drown this room with your nose, but you cannot drown the truth. And the truth is this: America's children are starving, and you, every single one of you, are responsible. The chamber sat in a stunned hush, as if the weight of her words had pulled the oxygen out of the air. Millions watching knew they had just witnessed a blow that no insult could erase. And as the gavel slammed in a futile attempt to restore order, one question lingered, pressing down on the conscience of every viewer. When the parasites feed, how long can the host survive? Crockett's hand shot into the air, clutching a large board. With a sharp snap she turned it toward the cameras, and suddenly, the entire chamber was staring at a blown-up photograph of a farmer standing in front of his padlocked barn, head buried in his hands. Gasps rippled through the room like a shockwave. She didn't pause. Another board flipped up. A family gathered on the porch of a foreclosed farmhouse, the sheriff's notice nailed to the door in red letters. The silence cracked as the gallery erupted in murmurs. Reporters scrambled for close-ups, and millions watching at home felt the punch in their gut. Trump shifted uneasily, his lips tightening, but before he could speak, Green leapt up, shrieking fake news, stage photos, propaganda. Jim Jordan joined in, chanting lies, lies, until other Republicans pounded their desks in rhythm, their voices colliding into a chorus of denial. The chamber quaked with their nose, but it didn't drown out the images. The photos burned into the eyes of everyone present, faces of despair that no chant could erase. Crockett stood perfectly still, letting the uproar swell, then sliced through it with a voice like steel. You can scream fake news all day, but tell me which part is fake. The boarded-up barns, the children eating one meal a day, the tears of families who worked their land for generations only to watch it stolen by bankruptcy courts. Is that fake? The chanting faltered, stumbling over her fury, and one by one the voices thinned. She leaned closer to the mic, lowering her tone until every ear strained to catch it. Look at these faces, these are Americans. They are not actors, they are not props, they are farmers whose soul fed this nation, whose sweat built the food on your table. And today, because of your policies, they are broken. Her words dropped, heavy, and the chamber felt smaller, suffocating under the truth pinned to those boards. Trump leaned toward his mic, but his voice cracked when he finally spoke. This is cherry-picked. America is winning. Our farmers are winning. The denial rang hollow, and even through the cameras, viewers could see the hollowness in his eyes. Crockett raised her voice again, cutting him off before he could recover. If America's farmers fall, who feeds our children? If they are silenced, who will keep our nation alive? And if leaders like you keep lying, Mr. President, how long before the truth itself starves to death? The chamber fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. For the first time that day, no one moved, no one shouted, no one blinked. It was the silence of a country forced to confront a question it could no longer ignore. Crockett let the photos of bankrupt farmers linger on the screens for a beat longer, then snapped the board shut with a crack that echoed like a gavel. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the chamber, and her voice lowered into a tone that made every camera zoom tighter. But this isn't just about farms. This is about the children those farms used to feed. And here is the truth none of you want America to hear. She raised a new report, pages thick, statistics bleeding red across the charts. Child malnutrition has risen 18% in the past year. More than 11 million kids don't know where their next meal will come from. School meal programs are being gutted, cafeterias stripped of funding, trays emptier by the week. The images shifted on the monitors behind her. Classrooms where kids slumped over their desks, eyes glassy from hunger. A principal describing how students fainted during lessons because breakfast programs had vanished. Mothers on camera confessing they skipped dinner so their children could eat a little more. The chamber went still, the faces of those children projected larger than life above the lawmakers who decided their fate. Trump smirked, leaning back in his chair with that familiar swagger. Toughen up, that's called freedom. Americans don't need handouts. They need to learn to stand on their own. His voice dripped arrogance, every syllable meant to dismiss the pain as weakness. Green clapped at his words. Jordan sneered. Cruz chuckled under his breath, but the effect was catastrophic. The crowd in the gallery erupted with gasps and angry shouts. A woman's voice cracked through the noise. My daughter fainted at school last week. Reporters scribbled furiously, the news ticker outside already flashing with updates. Trump. Hunger is freedom. Crockett's face darkened, her voice rising with a fury that shook the microphones. Freedom is not a 6-year-old collapsing in class. Freedom is not a mother starving so her child can survive the night. Freedom is not forcing families to choose between rent and food while billionaires feast. Her hand slammed down on the desk, the thunder of it jolting the chamber into silence. You dare call this freedom? No, Mr. President. This is cruelty wearing freedom's mask. Her words carved through the air, leaving nothing but stunned silence in their wake. Trump shifted in his seat, the grin slipping just slightly, the weight of her accusation pressing down harder than any statistic. For those watching at home, it wasn't just policy, it was personal. They saw their children, their schools, their kitchens in her words, and it hurt. Crockett leaned into the microphone one last time, her voice steadier now, carrying both grief and defiance. If hunger is freedom, then tell me what chains are heavier than the empty stomach of a child. Crockett's hand slammed the desk again, her voice slicing through the air like lightning. Mr. President, freedom isn't starving a 7-year-old. The words detonated in the chamber. For a moment, no one breathed and the audience erupted like a volcano. Gasps, shouts, and applause crashed against the walls, spilling over into chaos as the camera zoomed in on Trump's frozen face. The tension crackled so sharp you could feel it through the screen. Within seconds, social media ignited. Hashtags stormed across every platform. Hashtag starving kids. Hashtag Trump hates families. Hashtag Crockett strikes back. Phones in the gallery lit up as reporters pushed breaking alerts. Cable news anchors scrambled to interrupt programming, repeating her line again and again. Freedom isn't starving a 7-year-old. It was the soundbite that could not be erased. The line etched into America's memory in real time. Trump's grin faltered, but before he could retort, a voice shattered the chamber from the gallery. A protester, his hands shaking, stood up and shouted, "My son went to bed hungry last night." His cry wasn't polished, wasn't scripted, it was raw, cracked with pain, a voice so human it cut deeper than any statistic. Gasps rippled through the audience, and the chamber froze again. Security rushed toward him, but the moment had already branded itself into the nation's conscience. Crockett seized it, her voice lowering into something fierce and unshakable. Did you hear that, Mr. President? That is America speaking. Not the lobbyists, not the billionaires, not the political parasites who feed off suffering. That was a father, crushed by policies you defend. With a smirk, she turned toward the cameras, her eyes burning. And tonight, millions of families are living his nightmare. The Republicans tried to push back. Green screeched, "He's a plant. He's lying." Jordan barked, "This is all theater." But their voices now sounded tinny, desperate, drowned out by the roar of outrage building in the chamber and echoing across social media. The hashtags multiply, the fury uncontainable. Americans watching at home weren't hearing Green's Shrieks or Jordan's yells, they were replaying Crockett's words and that father's cry, over and over. Trump finally leaned into the microphone, his voice straining to regain control. It's sad, but people have to take responsibility. We can't feed everyone. The gallery erupted with boos so loud the gavels pounding vanished under the nose. Crockett didn't wait for order. She rose from her seat, her voice rising above the chaos, sharp and steady. If you can't feed America's children, then the audio roared back alive, and Crockett's voice came through like a thunderclap. You can silence my mic, but you cannot silence the cries of hungry children. The line detonated across the chamber, gasps shot through the gallery. Phones lit up as reporters scrambled to tweet the words before they faded. Social media ignited instantly. Hashtag silence her mic, hashtag voices of hunger, hashtag Crockett unstoppable. The Republicans faltered, their chant breaking apart, the rhythm collapsing into awkward shouts. Greene's voice cracked as she tried to outscream her, but the chamber had shifted. Crockett's words had already carved themselves into the air. She stood taller now, eyes locked on Trump, her tone unwavering. Cutting off my microphone doesn't cut off the truth. Striking my words doesn't strike the pain of millions of families. Shouting me down won't drown out the sound of children's stomachs growling in the night. The camera cut to Trump, his jaw set, face stone-like, but his knuckles white. As he gripped the table, behind him, Jordan shouted again, his voice hoarse now, "This is a circus." But the more they screamed, the weaker they looked, petty, desperate, clinging to rules while the reality of hunger loomed larger than their nose. Crockett lowered her tone, letting the hush return, her words dripping with a quiet, deliberate fury. You can play your games, file your motions, slam your gavels. But every time you try to silence me, you make their cries louder. And every American watching today can hear them now. The camera zoomed in tight, her face framed against the chaos, her voice cutting through with a precision that made it impossible to look away. She leaned forward one last time, her voice steady but pulsing with fire. "So I ask you, America, if it were your child going to bed hungry tonight, would you stay quiet or would you fight louder?" The chamber was still vibrating from Crockett's last words when she raised her hand again, this time holding a sleek remote. "You think hunger is the only crisis?" she said, her voice low, deliberate, slicing through the silence. "No. Hunger is only the beginning. What follows hunger is sickness, and sickness is already here." With a sharp click, the monitors behind her flickered to life. The first slide appeared, a headline in bold red letters, "Measles Outbreak. First time in 20 years. The image beneath it showed a child in a hospital bed, eyes glazed, his body wrapped in wires and tubes. A wave of gas swept across the chamber. Some lawmakers instinctively recoiled, others leaned forward, their faces pale. Crockett let the silence stretch just long enough for the horror to sink in before she clicked again. This time, the word plague filled the screen. Beneath it, a blurred photo of a hazmat team entering a suburban house, confirmed case. "Texas, last month," Crockett said, her tone flat and merciless. "A disease we thought belonged to medieval history is knocking on America's door." The area in the chamber tightened like a noose. Greene muttered under her breath, Jordan's jaw went slack, and even Trump shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Crockett didn't stop. Another click, another slide, this one with the haunting image of a child in leg braces, struggling to walk. Across the top, polio threat resurging. The word resurging glowed like fire on the screen. She slammed her hand against the desk, her voice cracking like thunder. "This is America in 2025, the wealthiest nation in history. And yet children are starving, and diseases we buried decades ago are clawing their way back because this administration dismantled the very defenses that kept us safe." The chamber froze in horror. No one moved. No one breathed. Reporters' fingers trembled as they typed, the sound of their keys echoing unnaturally loud in the suffocating stillness. Crockett's eyes locked on Trump. "Mr. President, under your watch and Secretary Kennedy's negligence, the United States has become a breeding ground for the very plagues our grandparents fought to eradicate. You didn't just fail to protect us, you invited catastrophe." Trump's face reddened, his mouth twitching as though searching for a response, but Crockett drove harder. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, so quiet that everyone strained to hear. "Tell me, how many more children must be buried before you call it a crisis? How many empty chairs at dinner tables before you admit your failure? How many coffins must leave our hospitals before you face the truth? The images glowed behind her like ghosts of a nation's shame. And the silence in the chamber was no longer political, it was human, raw, suffocating. Crockett leaned into the mic, her stare unblinking. Hunger breaks the body. Disease finishes the job. And unless we fight now, America's children will pay the price with their lives. Trump leaned back in his chair, shoulders shaking, and let out a booming laugh that bounced across the chamber like a hammer striking metal. We beat COVID, we can beat anything, he sneered, tossing his hands wide as if the deaths, the chaos, the funerals of the past years were nothing but a joke. Green clapped furiously. Jordan slapped the table in rhythm. Cruz smirked as if the performance was entertainment. For a heartbeat, their laughter echoed, shrill and triumphant. Then Crockett rose slowly, her eyes locked on Trump with the precision of a blade aimed at its target. Her voice didn't rise immediately, it cut low, sharp, deliberate, each word landing like a nail into the coffin of his arrogance. You didn't beat it, Mr. President, she said, her tone trembling with restrained fury. You buried 1 million Americans. The words dropped into the chamber like a bomb. Gasps erupted from every corner. The laughter died mid-echo, sucked into a silence so thick it seemed to swallow the air. The camera zoomed tight on Trump's face, catching the sudden twitch in his eye, the freeze in his smirk, the way his jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth. Crockett's voice rose now, flames behind every syllable. 1 million dead, families who never got to say goodbye, nurses who worked until their bodies collapsed, children who lost both parents in the same week. You didn't win, you presided over mass graves and called them victory. Her fist slammed the desk so hard the microphone rattled. The chamber convulsed into chaos. Protesters in a gallery screamed shame. Republicans shouted over each other, Green yelling lies. Jordan barking out of order. Cruz demanding the chair strike her words. Security rushed toward the edges of the crowd. But it was too late. The chamber had become a theater of grief and rage. Broadcast live to millions. Crockett turned to the screens behind her, now flashing the number 1,087,000 in bold red letters. That is the toll of your so-called victory, she thundered. More dead Americans than World War II, Korea, and Vietnam combined. And yet you laugh, Mr. President, you laugh. Her voice broke on the last word. Raw with emotion, pulling the audience with her, Trump tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He gripped the desk with white knuckles, his bravado leaking away. For the first time, he looked small under the glare of the cameras. Crockett leaned forward, her voice dropping back to a whisper that slashed sharper than any scream. A leader doesn't measure success in body bags. A leader doesn't call death a victory. So tell me, Mr. President, when you buried 1 million Americans, did you ever once stop to count the cost? The silence that followed wasn't just in the chamber, it spread across the nation, through living rooms, offices, and phones. A collective gasp from millions who felt the weight of her question crush the air from their lungs. The chamber was still reeling from Crockett's devastating line about 1 million dead when she reached into her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She held it up slowly, deliberately, like a card in a poker game no one expected her to play. The room leaned in. Since you like to laugh, Mr. President, she said, her tone steady as steel, let's see if America laughs at this. With a snap of her wrist, she slid the paper under the camera lens so every television across the nation could read it. At the top, in black ink, from Secretary Kennedy, the subject line froze. Blood in the chamber. Reduce vaccine budget. Redirect funds. Murmurs rippled like thunder through the audience. Crockett's voice climbed, slicing through the tension. This is a leaked email, dated 6 months ago. Secretary Kennedy, your hand-picked health chief, ordering cuts to vaccine programs, cuts that left children vulnerable, cuts that let measles return, that let the plague re-emerge, that invite polio back into American schools. Gasps hit the air like explosions. The Republicans scrambled instantly. Jordan leapt up shouting, fake, that's fake. Green shrieked, forgery. Cruz leaned into his mic, face flushed, spitting out illegally obtained evidence. But their words sounded desperate, defensive, a wall cracking under its own weight. The cameras didn't lie, the email was real, its damning words already screen capture and spreading like wildfire online. Crockett's eyes locked on the panel of officials seated stiffly behind Trump. Dr. Frank, you once told the University of North Texas that vaccination clusters could unleash catastrophic outbreaks. That was your slide. That was your warning. And yet here you sit, under a secretary who slashes budgets, under a president who mocks science. Tell me, who changed you, or the truth? Frank stammered, his lips trembling, but no words came. The silence was louder than any answer. Crockett turned her fire back to Trump. This is your administration in daylight. Once, these very officials preached the importance of vaccines. Now, they bow to your politics of denial, enabling a movement that kills children. This isn't leadership. This is sabotage. Her hand slammed the desk, the monitors behind her flashing the word sabotage in red. Trump tried to wave it off, but the damage was done. Reporters in the gallery shouted over each other, cameras flashing, hashtags multiplying, hashtag vaccine cuts, hashtag Kennedy exposed, hashtag sabotage in power. The nation wasn't just watching anymore, it was boiling. Crockett's voice dropped, low and chilling, pulling the room into her gravity. We are standing in the shadow of our own history. Diseases from the past are rising from their graves because this government chose politics over protection. And the question every American must ask themselves is simple: when the ghosts of old plagues come for us again, will we survive the future? The chamber was already teetering on the edge of collapse when Jasmine Crockett rose slowly from her seat, her movements deliberate, like a soldier stepping onto the battlefield. She didn't look at Green screaming in the corner, or Jordan pounding his fist, or Cruz shaking his head with a smirk. Her eyes locked on only one man, the President of the United States. The cameras swiveled to catch the moment, every lens zooming in tight as if America itself was holding its breath. She leaned into the microphone, her voice steady but charged like a storm. Look me in the eye. Mr. President, tell America's children you care. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They landed with the weight of a verdict, an executioner's blade hovering in the silence. Trump froze, his grin collapsed into a thin line, his body stiffening under the glare of millions watching. The lights above the chamber burned hot against his skin, sweat glistening on his forehead. The camera closed in so tight that every twitch in his face became magnified to the nation, the blinking to fast, the jaw tightening, the lips parting but no words forming. Seconds bled into eternity, the chamber stilled, as if an invisible hand had clamped down on the room. Even Green's shrill voice fell away. Jordan's fist stopped mid-pound. The only sound was the faint clicking of cameras, reporters capturing history one shutter at a time. Viewers at home leaned forward in their seats, counting silently without realizing. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15, still nothing. Crockett didn't look away, her eyes bored into him, unyielding, merciless, daring him to lie to America's children with a straight face. At 20 seconds, whispers swept through the gallery. At 30, the silence turned suffocating, every second stretching longer than the last. At 40, the tension was unbearable. Families across the country watching in disbelief, whispering to themselves, why won't he answer? By the time the clock hit 47 seconds, the silence had become his own weapon. Trump's face had flushed red, his hands gripping the desk so hard his knuckles whitened. His mouth twitched as if a word might come, but it didn't. He had nothing. Nothing for the hungry children, nothing for the grieving parents, nothing for the farmers whose land was gone. Crockett finally broke the silence, her voice low but ringing like a bell tolling in a graveyard. There it is, America. You just watched your president, your so-called defender, sit in silence, or asked if he cares about your children. That silence is louder than any lie he could tell. The chamber erupted not in noise this time, but in raw shock. Reporters bolted for the exits, desperate to break the story. Hashtags exploded across every platform. Hashtag for 7 seconds, hashtag Trump silent, hashtag Crockett confronts. But inside the chamber, one truth lingered heavier than any chant or gavel. Silence can damn a man louder than words. The silence of 47 seconds still hung heavy, and Marjorie Taylor Greene shot up from her seat like a fuse igniting. Her voice tore through the chamber, shrill and venomous. She's a witch. She's a traitor. This woman hates America. She jabbed her finger at Jasmine, her face contorted with rage, spit flying under the harsh lights. The GOP benches erupted. In support, Jordan pounding the table, Crew smirking with theatrical disdain. Their nose was desperate, a smokescreen for the president's collapse. Jasmine didn't flinch. She turned her head slowly toward Green, her eyes narrowing, her lips curling into the faintest smile, not of amusement, but of a warrior sharpening her blade. The chamber hushed again, everyone waiting for her reply. And when she spoke, her voice cracked like thunder. If defending children makes me a witch, then I'll burn gladly, while you roast in your own corruption. The line detonated like dynamite. The gallery exploded with gasps, cheers, and applause, the sound reverberating off the marble walls. Reporters clutched their phones, typing furiously, the phrase already flashing across tickers and flooding feeds. I'll burn gladly, while you roast in your own corruption. Social media detonated hashtags climbing by the second. Hashtag witch or warrior. Hashtag Green humiliated. Hashtag Crockett burns corruption. Green shrieked back, her voice cracking out, you're unhinged. You're dangerous. But her words drowned under the roar of the crowd. A chant began to ripple from the gallery, growing louder with each repetition. Crockett, Crockett, Crockett. The sound swelled, fueled by fury, by hope, by the hunger for anyone to stand unflinching in the face of power. Trump's face darkened further, the weight of Crockett's blow landing squarely on his allies. He leaned toward the mic, trying to cut through the chaos, but his words sputter. This is insanity. Total insanity. Yet his voice was weak, trembling under the avalanche of applause and chants. Crockett rose taller, refusing to let the energy fade. She turned back toward Green, her tone sharper now, slicing with precision. You call me a traitor because I refuse to betray children. You call me dangerous because I speak the truth. But let's be clear, the real danger isn't me standing here. The real danger is your silence when children starve, your loyalty when corruption burns this nation to ash. The crowd roared again, louder than before. Even some faces in the Republican seats flickered with unease, the weight of her words too heavy to shrug off. The gavel hammered desperately, but the moment was already beyond control. The hearing had transformed into a battlefield of truth versus lies, and America was watching the clash in real time. Jasmine leaned into the microphone one final time, her eyes cutting through the chaos, her voice calm, but laced with fire. Call me what you will, but remember this, if fighting for America's children makes me an enemy in your eyes, then history will decide who the real traitors are. The chamber was still vibrating with the echoes of chants when Jasmine shifted her stance, her voice dropping into a darker, heavier register. But hunger isn't the only weapon you've unleashed on America. Let's talk about health, because your war on families didn't stop. The chamber was still trembling from Crockett's last question when a sudden movement in the gallery drew every eye. A woman, her hands shaking, rose slowly to her feet. She clutched a framed photo against her chest, a little boy with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. Her voice cracked as she forced the words out, raw and trembling, yet so sharp they sliced through the nose like glass. Mr. Trump, my baby is dead because of your cuts. The chamber froze, the gavel fell silent. The chants stopped mid-breath, reporters stopped typing, their fingers hovering over keyboards. Even Green's mouth snapped shut, the insult dying in her throat. All that remained was the sound of this mother's grief filling every corner of the room. She lifted the photo higher, her tears streaking down her face. He was 7, he should have been in school today. He should have been playing ball, laughing, running. Instead, he's in the ground because your administration gutted the vaccines that could have saved him. Gasps tore through the gallery, some muffled sobs following close behind. The camera zoomed in on the photo, broadcasting it to millions of living rooms across America. Viewers at home leaned closer, the image burning into their memory. The child's smile became the indictment no statistic could match, the face of a life erased by negligence. Trump shifted, then easily, in his chair, his jaw working but no words forming. The sweat on his temple glistened under the lights. His allies tried to move, Jordan half rising from his seat, Green opening her mouth to shout, but no sound dared interrupt the weight of the moment. The silence was suffocating, crushing the chamber in grief too heavy to deny. Jasmine Crockett stood slowly, her eyes locked on the grieving mother. She didn't speak immediately. She let the silence stretch, let the pain settle on the room like a funeral bell tolling. Then her voice, quiet but charged, filled the void. This is the America your policies created. An America where mothers bury their children because you cut what kept them alive. This is not leadership. This is slaughter dressed as governance. The mother's sobs shook her shoulders as she clutched the photo tighter. Crockett turned back to Trump, her voice hardening, her stare unblinking. Look at her. Mr. President, look at that picture. Tell this mother that her child's death was the price of your politics. Tell her his life was expendable. The chamber sat in stunned silence, as though time itself had stopped. The photo trembled in the woman's hands, the cameras capturing every detail, every tear, every ounce of grief. And as the silence dragged on, every American watching knew this was no longer just a hearing, it was a reckoning. Crockett leaned into the microphone one final time, her voice steady and merciless. So tell me, America, how many more children must die before we admit the real epidemic is not disease, but deliberate cruelty? Trump's chair screeched against the floor as he shot to his feet, his face burning crimson, his voice erupting like a cannon. Bullshit, I never killed anyone. The words thundered through the chamber, echoing off marble and steel, a raw, uncontrolled blast of rage. His fist pounded the desk, papers scattering like shrapnel. The camera zoomed in on his contorted face, eyes wild, jaw clenched, spittle flying as he roared. For the first time, the polished veneer of power was gone. What remained was raw fury, unfiltered and unhinged. Broadcast to millions, the outburst sent shockwaves through the room. Gasps burst from the gallery. Green leapt up, clapping furiously as if his rage was her anthem. Jordan bellowed, "That's right, he never killed anyone." Cruz leaned forward, smirking, "This circus is over." Their voices layered into a wall of no's, a desperate attempt to drown the truth in chaos. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move, didn't flinch. She rose slowly, her stare fixed on Trump with surgical precision. When she spoke, her words cut sharper than any shout. "No, Mr. President, you didn't pull the trigger. But your lies killed more than bullets ever will." The line ripped through the chamber like a blade. Silence followed for half a breath, and then the explosion came. The gallery erupted into a storm of screams and shouts, half cheers, half fury. Protesters cried out from the rafters. Reporters typed furiously. Tweets flooding the internet. #lies kill, #Crockett vs Trump, #bullshit heard round the world. On the GOP side, Jordan slammed his chair back, lunging half out of his seat, his finger stabbing the air at Crockett. Green screeched, "She should be expelled." Cruz shouted over them, "This is treason." Their voices collided into a toxic roar. Across the aisle, Democrats rose to defend her, their fists pounding desks, their voices clashing with equal ferocity. The chamber teetered on the edge of violence, the gavel slammed, useless against the storm. Shouts overlapped with boos, and in the gallery, man screamed, "How many more have to die?" Security surged forward as fists slammed against wood, and bodies leaned too far over desks. It was no longer debate, it was nearly a brawl. Crockett stood immovable in the eye of the storm, her face lit by the glare of the monitors, her voice steady as steel. "History will not remember your tantrums, it will not remember your insults. It will remember the graves, the hunger, the suffering, carved by your lies, and it will remember who had the courage to stand here and call them what they are." Capitol Police spilled into the chamber, their uniforms cutting through the chaos, forcing lawmakers back into their seats. The roar of the crowd ebbed, but the tension lingered, vibrating like an unstruck chord. The cameras stayed fixed on Crockett, her words replaying in the minds of millions. And as the gavel pounded in vain for order, one question thundered louder than all the no's: if lies can kill more than bullets, how many more lives will be lost before truth takes its stand? The chamber still shook from the near brawl, Capitol Police holding the line as lawmakers shouted over one another. The air was thick with rage, sweat, and fear. Then, slowly, Jasmine Crockett lifted her hand, palm open, her presence alone pulling the room back into focus. She didn't yell to reclaim control, she let the chaos die under the weight of her silence. When she spoke, her voice was low, deliberate, each word a dagger aimed at the heart of the nation. "This is America, 2025, the words cracked like thunder. The room fell quiet, cameras tightening on her face, her voice carrying into millions of living rooms, children starving, diseases raging, farmers bankrupt. This isn't an accident. This isn't misfortune. This is the legacy of Trump Kennedy. She paused, letting the sentence hang in the air like a funeral bell. The monitors behind her came alive once more, a collage of devastation flashing like a montage of nightmares. First, a line of children in a school cafeteria, trays holding nothing but a slice of bread. Then, hospital beds filled with children coughing under oxygen masks, measles lesions visible on their skin. Next, farmers standing in barren fields, foreclosure signs hammered into the soil. And finally, a number filling the screen, in blazing red, 55% farm bankruptcies. 1 million COVID dead, 18% child malnutrition rise, gasps rippled through the gallery. Some buried their faces in their hands, others shook their heads in disbelief. On social media, screenshots of the montage spread instantly, hashtags multiplying, hashtag legacy of failure, hashtag America 2025, hashtag Nightmare Nation. Trump shifted uneasily, his face drained of color. He tried to lean into the microphone, but the weight of her words had already collapsed his defenses. Green muttered angrily. Jordan pounded his desk again. Cruz leaned back pretending to smirk, but none of it mattered. The chamber wasn't looking at them anymore, it was locked on Crockett. Her voice climbed, fierce and unrelenting now. You can shout fake news, you can pound the table. You can scream bullshit until you lose your voice, but you cannot erase what America is living. Every child who goes to bed hungry is proof. Every farmer who loses their land is proof. Every coffin lowered into the ground because of preventable disease is proof, and history will write it in ink you cannot scrub away. Trump Kennedy turned the world's most powerful nation into a graveyard of broken families. The gallery erupted in thunderous applause and anguished cries, the sound a collision of grief and hope. Reporters shouted over each other, their microphones stretched toward her. Hashtags rocketed higher, trending globally now, as if the whole world was witnessing America's reckoning. Crockett leaned forward, her eyes burning into the camera, her voice now sharp as glass but pulsing with raw humanity. So I ask you, America, do we let this nightmare continue, or do we wake up? The words fell like a gavel of their own, heavier than any pounding would. And for millions watching, the question wasn't just for the chamber, it was for every living soul in the nation. Outside the Capitol, history thundered louder than any gavel. The steps were flooded with people, farmers in dusty boots clutching foreclosure notices, nurses in scrubs holding up placards stained with red paint like blood, parents carrying photos of their children. Their voices rose in unison, raw and relentless, rattling the iron gates. Feed our kids. Save our farms. Fund our health. The chants rolled like waves, surging up the marble facade, colliding with the echo of Crockett's words still reverberating inside. News helicopters circled above, their spotlights sweeping across the crowd. Banners snapped in the wind. 55% bankrupt. Starving isn't freedom. Lies kill. The roar of voices grew into a storm so loud that reporters had to shout into their microphones to be heard. Live feeds broadcast the chaos across every major network, split screens showing Crockett's face inside and the protesters outside. A nation mirrored in anger and defiance. In kitchens, living rooms, and break rooms, millions sat glued to their screens. A mother in Ohio clutched her daughter's hand tighter as Crockett's woes played. A farmer in Iowa stood in silence, tears streaking through dust on his cheeks. A nurse in California threw her fist into the air, screaming along with the crowd outside the Capitol. America was no longer watching as spectators, they were participants, every heartbeat sensed with the chest pounding against the walls of power. Inside the chamber, the noise seeped through the windows like distant thunder. Lawmakers shifted in their seats, glancing nervously at the vibrating glass panes as if the building itself might crack under the pressure of the people. Trump sat stiff, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting toward the muffled roar outside. For the first time, it wasn't just Crockett holding him in check, it was the nation itself pressing in, demanding an answer. Crockett glanced toward the sound, her expression unshaken. She didn't need to tell the chamber what was happening. The chants were already penetrating the air, carrying the weight of a verdict no politician could rewrite. They hear us, she murmured, her words almost drowned by the chants, but the microphones caught them, transmitting them to millions. And they will not be silenced. The camera cut to the crowd again, farmers lifting their fists, nurses raising their signs, parents screaming until their voices cracked. It was no longer just a protest, it was a reckoning unfolding live. And as the chants grew louder, the chamber itself seemed to vibrate, as though history was knocking on its walls, demanding to be let in. The roar outside fused with the tension inside, creating a single pulse that shook the Capitol to its core. And as America watched, one question surged above the chants, above the chaos, above the silence of its leaders. When the people themselves become the gavel, who among the powerful dares ignore the verdict? The roar from outside seeped through the chamber walls like a drumbeat of justice, shaking the air as Jasmine Crockett rose once more. She spread her hands wide, her voice cutting through the din. Hunger, health, housing, child care, peace. By peace, this administration has gutted every pillar of American life. This isn't about left or right, Republican or Democrat. This is about life or death. The word struck with the finality of a hammer. Faces in the chamber tightened, some lawmakers shifting uneasily, others averting their eyes. The monitors flickered with images, empty refrigerators, eviction notices taped to doors, daycare centers shuttered with chains. The weight of it pressed down like a storm cloud. No one could escape. Trump leaned back in his chair, a sneer curling across his face. He grabbed the mic, his tone dripping contempt. "You're nothing but a loudmouth. A grandstander, that's all you'll ever be." His allies chuckled darkly, Green slamming her desk in agreement, Jordan pointing and jeering as though the insult were a victory, but Crockett didn't blink. She stepped forward, her voice slicing sharper than a blade. "Better a loudmouth than a lying coward." The chamber froze. Gasps rippled through the gallery, reporters jolted in their seats, their fingers racing across keyboards. Hashtags burst onto screens. Hashtag LOUDMOUTHBS coward. Hashtag Crockett strikes. Hashtag Trump exposed. Trump single quotes as face flushed, his mouth opening to strike back, but Crockett didn't give him the chance. She leaned closer to the mic, her voice low, steady, uncheckable, because a loudmouth can wake the nation. A loudmouth can speak for the voiceless. But a lying coward hides behind power while families suffer, and America sees the difference. The crowd in the gallery erupted again, chants colliding with the thunder from outside, a single voice rising from millions. The chamber wasn't just vibrating with history anymore, it was convulsing with judgment, and as Crockett's words echoed across the nation, one truth could not be silenced. Cowardice in power is far deadlier than courage with a microphone. The chamber no longer shook with rage, it pulsed with something stronger. Hope. From the gallery, a lone voice rose, "Crockett." Crockett. Within seconds, it multiplied. Outside, thousands picked it up, their chant roaring through the Capitol walls until the entire building vibrated with her name. Jasmine stood still, letting the sound wash over her. For months she'd been mocked as a radical, dismissed as Noah's. Now that Noah's had become a nation's heartbeat, farmers, nurses, parents, and millions watching at home echoed the same cry. Crockett. Reporters scrambled as their phones buzzed with breaking news. A poll, conducted mid-hearing, had leaked. The numbers blazed across screens. Trump approval, down 19 points. Disapproval, record high. Gasps swept through the press row, whispers snapping like sparks across the chamber. A journalist shouted, "Mr. President, the country is abandoning you." The impact was instant. Trump's face drained, his hand gripping the desk so tight his knuckles whitened. Green sat frozen, Jordan's voice caught in his throat, Cruz's smirk slipped into silence. For the first time, the fortress cracked not from an opponent's argument, but from the people's judgment. Crockett seized the moment. Her voice rose above the chants, sharp and unyielding. America is watching, and America is done being silent. These chants, they are not for me. They are for the children who go hungry, the families who lose their homes, the patients denied care. They are for every American who refuses to collapse under your cruelty. The cameras framed her against the backdrop of glowing red numbers, her name pounding in chants that refused to die. She looked less like a lawmaker and more like a warrior, her voice carrying through every screen, every home, every heart. And then, with the nation hanging on her words, she delivered the question that cut deeper than any statistic. "So I ask you, America, what would you risk to save your country from collapse?" The chants of her name still rumbled like thunder outside, But inside the chamber Jasmine Crockett stood tall, her voice cutting through the chaos with the calm of a verdict. She didn't shout, she didn't need to. Every word carried the weight of a nation trembling on the edge. "Justice," she began, her tone steady and unflinching, "isn't measured by enemies defeated, but by lives defended." The room fell silent, every eye fixed on her. She raised her hand toward the monitors, where the images of the nightmarish hearing lingered: empty barns, starving children, shuttered hospitals, grieving mothers. Justice is defending the farmer who lost his land, so his children don't inherit despair. Justice is defending the mother who skipped meals so her child could eat, so she doesn't collapse under hunger. Justice is defending the sick, denied care by politics, so no family has to bury a loved one for lack of medicine. Justice is defending the children, robbed of futures by lies dressed as policy. Her voice cracked slightly, raw with grief, then surged again with fire. "You measure power in polls and profits. I measure it in lives saved, futures protected, hope restored. And today, America has shown it knows the difference." She pointed toward the gallery where farmers, nurses, and Terrence wept openly, their applause trembling but fierce. Trump sat frozen, his jaw tight, unable to meet her gaze. His allies shifted uneasily, the walls closing in. The cameras framed the contrast: Crockett rising higher, steadier, stronger. While the president shrank beneath the weight of his silence, Jasmine leaned into the mic, her final words carrying the sharpness of a blade and the warmth of a promise. "This fight was never about me. It was about them, the farmers, the mothers, the children, the sick. And I swear before God and this nation, I will not stop defending them. Because justice isn't the sound of an enemy falling, it's the sound of a child's laughter returning, a family's table filled again, a life saved from despair." The chamber erupted, the chants outside merging with the applause inside, the sound swelling into something larger than politics, something like history. And as her words echoed across America, one question carved itself into the conscience of a nation: if justice demands defense, will you stand and fight or stay silent and watch your country fall? Jasmine's voice cut once more, colder now, precise as a blade. "And let's stop pretending this ends at hunger, sickness, or poverty. Because when you cannot win the trust of the people, you cheat them. That is the strategy of this GOP cling to power, not by serving America, but by sabotaging its elections." The chamber gasped as if struck by lightning. Reporters jerked upright, fingers racing across keyboards. Green's eyes went wide. Jordan leapt from his chair, shouting, "Lies!" Cruz barked, "Defamation!" But their protests only deepened the silence that followed, a silence heavy with recognition. Everyone knew she had just crossed into forbidden territory, the accusation too raw, too dangerous, too undeniable. Crockett didn't back down. Her hand slammed the desk, the crack reverberating like a gunshot. "Voter suppression, gerrymandered maps, purged rolls, rigged machines. This is not patriotism, it's theft. And every stolen vote is a bullet aimed at democracy itself." The gallery erupted, some cheering, others shouting, but none unmoved. Hashtags surged across screens. Hashtag truth vs lies. Hashtag Crockett exposes. Hashtag democracy on trial. Trump single quotes as face twisted, his mouth opening, but for once, the roar of the people drowned him out. The hearing no longer felt like a congressional proceeding, it had transformed into a national referendum. Truth versus lies, survival versus collapse. The walls of the chamber seemed to tremble under the weight of that choice. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice low but burning. "This is bigger than one hearing, bigger than one president. This is America choosing whether it lives in truth or dies in lies." The cameras locked on her face, the gallery hushed, the chants outside crescendoed into a single roar, and she delivered the line that would haunt the nation. "When power cheats the people, the question isn't whether democracy survives, it's whether we do." The gavel pounded for the last time, but no one was listening. The hearing had already outgrown the chamber. As Jasmine Crockett gathered her papers and stepped down from the dais, the cameras followed, capturing not just a politician, but a figure walking straight into history. She pushed open the heavy wooden doors, and the roar from outside crashed over her like a wave. Farmers lifted their weathered hands to greet her, their palms rough with years of work. Nurses in scrubs reached out, some with tears streaking their cheeks. A janitor still in his work uniform pressed forward, his voice trembling, "Thank you for speaking for people like me." Jasmine clasped every hand, hugged every shoulder, her face set not in triumph but in solemn resolve. The crowd surged around her, not as fans to a celebrity, but as citizens gathering to a defender. Phones lit up, flashes exploded, chants of her name merged with sobs of relief and cries of anger. The scene felt less like a protest and more like a rebirth, a nation finding its pulse again in the daylight. As the camera panned wide, the narrator's voice carried above the nose, steady and reflective. She wasn't flawless, she wasn't untouchable, but she refused to bow, and in that refusal, America found its hope. Jasmine raised one hand, not in victory, but in defiance, the Capitol glowing behind her, the people pressing close before her. The chants quieted, replaced by a hush, as though the nation itself leaned closer to hear. And then the final words fell, not from Jasmine, but as a challenge to every viewer watching. If justice is silenced, democracy dies. Will you rise or stay silent? The story reminds us that justice is not an abstract idea, but a daily choice. It lives in the courage to speak when silence feels safer, in defending the vulnerable when power turns its back, and in refusing to accept hunger, sickness, or corruption as normal. True strength is measured not by crushing opponents, but by protecting lives. Jasmine's stand is a mirror held up to all of us. If democracy can fall silent in a chamber, it can fall silent anywhere. The question is when it's your turn. Will you rise and fight, or look away? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.